Okay, so that's one of the crew members fully painted, so that's what we're going to try and carry on with for the other crew member and then the bolt thrower itself. So I'm using the Calidor Sky, which was the base colour. I'm just going to reapply that to all the areas where it was used. Just aiming to leave some of that shaded blue in place. It's a very tricky bit to get into now. And now the quiver here. Which again, I'm pretty much just going to go over the whole thing. And at this stage you start to see the colour kind of becoming more consistent, less patchy now. So effectively this is the third layer of paint I've put on there, plus the shade. You've just got to do your best with these awkward areas. And then it's the same blue on the bolt thrower. Just going over those same blue areas. I think that's just about it. I'm just going in with the Techless blue to start layering up the colour. And this time just leaving a little bit of the darker blues behind, and the edges and the recesses, so I'm not going over everything. There's different ways of doing this. You can do all the colours at the same time, in terms of doing a layer on each and build them all up at the same time. I think in this instance I'm just going to pretty much work on the blue through completion and then move on to maybe the yellow and do it that way. Doesn't really matter. You can do whatever way you feel comfy doing it. I think when you're batch painting a lot of miniatures, best to do all the same passes at the same time across all the miniatures. But when kind of working on just one or two like this, it can be a bit easier just to stick to completing one colour entirely before moving on to the next. If you do make any mistakes here and there, you can always fix them. The coloured line or border on the armour for these metal miniatures is much finer than the borders on the plastic ones. There's really not too much to work with in terms of running a brush across them. And then having gone over it once with the Techless blue, just going to go over it again. Just while I've still got the miniature in my hand, just go straight onto a second coat. And then just doing the same process now with the blues on the bolt thrower. Definitely going to need a couple of passes. You shouldn't get too frustrated when using these more transparent layer paints, especially when you thin them down. They don't tend to cover very well, but that's the point. You know, you've got to do 2 or 3 layers to try and build up a smoother finish. And from that you get a bit of a blend happening as well. I do try and get to the underside of it as well. I'm just trying to leave some of the darker shades in the recesses. Okay, getting there now. Okay, so that's the tickless blue, but we'll keep it handy because we'll be adding a further highlight to this and may need to drop back to this tickless blue just to help blend things away. Okay, got some of the Lucerne blue now. Just going to try and do some highlighting. Just down the edges. Not such a defined edge on the shoulder pads, so I just got to paint in the highlight as best you can. And then for the blue outline around the bottom of the plate mail, don't need to go over the whole lot. Can look quite good if you just do a small area. And the same for the bolt thrower itself. Just going to catch these ridges on the end caps, and with a couple of passes of this should be pretty much done. I am thinning the paint as I work. If you find it tricky to do the highlighting, there's a technique that I tend to use that I'll be making use of in this scenario here, where in some of the areas you go a bit heavy in terms of the size of the highlight or the width of the highlight. So for example, on these points here, if when adding the highlight paint, it's a bit too much or a bit too strong, it can actually be an easier way of doing it if you do go a bit heavier for a start and then go back with the mid colour. In this case, Lucerne blue, and you go back with that fairly well watered down, and then you just soften the highlight and mix it back. So if I can create a couple of examples on here. Maybe just to show what I mean. It's almost a case of doing some quite clumsy looking highlighting. Like that. So you can see there, that's quite a heavy highlight. Okay, so I've got some of the Lothern blue. I've watered it down a good amount. And here we've got this quite harsh highlight. And if there's plenty of water in the paint, it's nice and thin. You can just blend that in to a better degree with that thin paint. And it just lets you tighten up the highlight. So if you're painting something like a Space Marine armour and you're struggling to do a highlight on the edge, even if you just put down what you can, if it's a bit heavy-handed, it doesn't matter. And then you can go back with the main mid-tone, thin it down plenty. And then just smooth that away. Just instead of having to worry about producing a really tight highlight line. And I use that technique all the time. If the paint's not thinned enough, you're going to just end up painting over the top of the highlight. So you just got to make sure that it is thinned. Okay, just adding a little bit of white scar to the mix now. Or at least mixed with the Lothern. Yeah, the Lothern blue. And it's just a case of sparingly adding that here and there to the previous highlight. And you can build that up to whatever amount you want. Just getting smaller each time. With where you put the paint. And again, as before, if you feel you've gone too far with it, or you've misplaced a highlight, you just go in with a watered down paint of the previous stage, and work back. Something like that. And then let it dry and check it, make sure you're happy. And if not, you can always go back to previous paint, thin it down, add some more on, and do it until you're happy. But I think that looks okay for what I'm trying to achieve. And now just doing the yellow, which is the same process as shown in the previous videos in the series. So I won't go into too much depth on this. I'm just going back to the Averland sunset to go back over the yellow areas and smooth out the finish while trying to leave the darker shaded yellow in the recesses. So there's quite a few bits to do on this bolt thrower, so I'll get on with that and then see how it looks. And now just using the Arial yellow, start brightening this up. It's still not entirely clear to me how this thing gets onto the battlefield. Without any wheels on it. I'm not sure if this thing starts walking around or not when they need to move it. I'll need to go back to the army book and have a look to see if it mentions how it gets around. And this is going to need a couple of coats just to build up that yellow. So just about there now with the Uriel yellow. And that's going to give us a really good base. And I've gone over this, as I said, a couple of times to build up that colour. So that's that stage finished. And next will be to move on and do some of the flash kits, yellow next. Just been adding the flash kits yellow now. And hopefully you can see, if the lighting isn't too bright, the difference from this side to that. And I've been doing this in 2 passes also. Just to try and smooth it out. And always mixing in some water into it. Just adding some white scar to the yellow mix now to add a further kind of highlight to it. Catch some of the edges as well. And then the tips of these feather shapes. Okay, so that's the yellow now done for the bolt thrower. Just got some Kislev flesh colour now. Just to tidy up the skin a bit before going in with highlights. Just correcting any little mistakes. It's also good for correcting any of the areas where the contrast paint has maybe left a mark that you don't like. And then it's the flayed one flesh. Next, to start highlighting. There's not much to work with on this high elf with the helmet design that he has. I think that'll do for the face. Right, so on to the red now, and back to the base colour of Mephiston red. Just going to try and get some colour back onto the sides of this scroll design. It's quite tricky with all the little details. Just adding the same red to the, well, I believe they're gems under the feet. Certainly in the army book they're painted up as gems, so that's how we'll do them. The actual gemstones up on the upper surfaces and the underside also quite tricky to paint, because normally you paint gems that are sitting vertical, which makes sense in terms of the colouring. So I guess just be a case of doing it the same way. And then for the feathers on the arrows, or the bolts at least, just going to drag some of the Mephiston red over them. A kind of, not a dry brush, but a kind of wet brush. And then down the sides. Just to give us something to highlight onto. And really trying to be neat now. We don't want to be having to fix the white or the yellow. And it's time for the Evil Sun's Scarlet. Pretty much going over the whole lot with this. And I'll do a couple of passes with quite a thin mix. So I've added some Wild Rider red in with the Evil Sun's Scarlet, and I'm just now trying to put a small amount at the top of these sections, and then also on the feet. And then again on the arrow flights. And I'm just adding Wild Rider red on its own. And I've just got some of the Fire Dragon Bright on its own now. Okay, so that's the red done there. And then if you like, for the gems, to push the highlight a bit further, maybe a little bit of yellow. The grass that I add to the base later will probably hide these big gems on the feet. Okay, so that's that stage done. Okay, getting there now. I'm just using Iron Breaker, this silver colour, and starting to go over all the metal areas. Because we based the metal areas with Eshin Grey and then some Nuln Oil, we've got a really good starting point for picking out the silver colour on top, which goes on really well. So just doing the metal surrounds and the gems. And it shows up really well. It doesn't need to be gone over too many times, just usually one pass seems to do it. Just want to be really careful now. Sometimes with these little metal studs, I find it easier to dab the silver on from one side and then flip it over and come at them from the opposite direction. You might not be able to see this very well, but I just prefer that to trying to put one big blob on at a time. We've already got that nice dark outline around them from the previous steps. And just finishing off now with some Maroon Fang steel to complete the model. Just brightens up the silver areas. Okay, so that's the completed paint job on the model. The only thing that remains now is to paint in the base. Okay, so that's everything painted. I've given it a spray with some monatoran varnish to protect the paint as best I can. And the very last stage is to just go over all the gems with a bit of gloss varnish. Just to give them the sparkle. Remember where all the gems are and not touch them once you've painted them. And then I do want to try and do in and around the feet here. Without going onto the grass, if I can avoid it. This is just a little 3D printed base that I've made, a movement tray sort of thing, just to put them all together. So there we go, that's the completed High Elf bolt thrower in crew. Happy to have got that one done. Happy with the result. Tried to do the colour scheme as per the army book, and what I'll do now is maybe take a few shots of it so you can maybe see it better. But in any case, thanks very much for watching the video. Thanks.